in any case, we didn't have a national. So as we go forward, we need the solution has to have three legs. First of all, in the same way that the United States has a strategic petroleum reserve, they should have a strategic reserve of strategic inventory of PPEs and other medical supplies. And I'm thinking to cover 4 months or so of supply. Second, hospitals need to have their own supplies. And just like after the financial crisis with stress tests for banks, we should have stress tests for hospitals to make sure that can withstand, let's say, 4 weeks or something before the central inventory comes in. And you don't need years of supplies because companies can, using the Defense Authorization Act, the government can force company to make whatever needed. But there's a third leg of this, and this is workers. We do have shortage in places of nurses and other medical workers. And just like the United States has the Army National Reserve, it should have a medical national reserve. These are civilians who are once a month, let's say, work for a weekend in a hospital, and once a year for 2 or 3 weeks get trained on new equipment, can supplement the need of medical workers. I just want to say that, for example, operating a ventilator is not brain surgery. You can train anybody within a few days to operate a ventilator, but you release people who do brain surgery to do other things. Anyway, let me stop here. Talked too much already.
No, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Yoshi. And what I'd like to do now is, Patrick, I'd like to move on to you because I'd like to ask you how supply chains link investments in resiliency to financial metrics that matter to CFOs and to CEOs.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things across the board that we're seeing is that CEOs, boards of directors, executives of all sorts are now involved in the investment decisions throughout supply chains. And whereas in the past, it may have been a decision to drive forecast accuracy or efficiency. And now we're seeing that there's this opportunity to link the capabilities to some of these metrics. So it's not just about inventory, but it's understanding the linkage between inventory and cost of goods sold and how those come together to drive return on assets, for example. And some of those financial metrics are another level of understanding. And certainly as we think about scenarios, the ability to understand how we will execute an individual order per se, it's now even the standpoint where it says, what's our least cost? What's our highest service? How do we compare these two things and see what the impact is on our business? And so it's really being able to convey not just that individual action and that one piece of information, but how it connects further throughout the information flow and to something that is really driving business value.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Really concise. And Ava, finally, I'd like to move on to you because we've seen a big rise with omnichannel. And what I'd like to ask you is, does resilience have a different implication for omnichannel?
Thank you, Omera. So I would say that definitely, and I want to connect with some of the things that the previous speakers brought, the pandemic definitely accelerates the growth of e-commerce and digital. And on the other hand, also the pandemic forced consumers to adopt new shopping behaviors they may not have otherwise, especially in groceries. And we observe this growth in digital groceries. So for different brick and mortars definitely, they are investing a lot in omnichannel, trying to face these challenges in different ways. They are trying to leverage their brick and mortar physical stores in order to prepare e-commerce orders and ship from their stores in order to meet customer expectations in terms of same-day delivery, 2 hours delivery that customers are asking for. And we observed that in Amazon. In 2018, they bought Whole Foods just to be able to compete in the grocery industry and compete also with Walmart in the fresh food, delivering and using these supermarket physical stores to prepare and ship from those stores. We are also observing how brick and mortars like Walmart are also investing tremendously in the digital world. They bought Jet.com in 2016. They bought different marketplaces in order to be able to compete in this digital world. So I fully agree with Martin Christopher about the approach of investment. They are investing. And what is interesting is we are observing traditional brick and mortars investing in the digital world in order to be able to compete with big players like Amazon, but at the same time, Amazon is also investing in the brick and mortar space. Last week, they announced their plan to roll out physical department stores just to compete with Macy's, Kohl's, and Gap in the clothes industry. And they are trying to do this for many different reasons. Of course, they want also to test technology like the virtual dressing or the scan and go with their convenience stores. So there are many other purposes, but one of the main reasons is to invest in omni-channel and become more an omni-channel retailer. So it's interesting to see how the both worlds, the physical and the digital, are converging nowadays.
Absolutely, Ava. And thank you so much for that. It's a very interesting time, of course, for omni-channel. What I'd like to do now is give an opportunity for members of our audience to ask a few questions. So please, in the chat box, please submit your questions, and we'll use this opportunity to ask any of our panelists. So we have a question that's come in from Gabrielle Saldana, who's asking, what do you think about collaborative logistics platforms? Is it sustainable from a labor point of view? Who out of my panelists would like to have a go at answering that question?
I'll start. The question is, what do you mean by, platforms? There are all kinds of platforms. And when you talk about logistics, platform related to logistics, whether it's Uber or Lyft or food delivery or whatever, I cannot believe I'm saying this as the consummate capitalist, but I deplore it leads to unbelievable exploitation and of labor. And as I said, I'm the ultimate capitalist. I started companies, I had companies, but seeing the gig economy, these are the people who are mostly in danger, at risk of, for example, during the pandemic, because they actually have to go to work. They cannot do Zoom. They cannot deliver your food through Zoom. They cannot give you a ride through Zoom. These are the people. And they are partly because of they don't know how to calculate, profits, and everything beyond their cost, they calculate as profit, and they give basically zero value to their time, or very low value to their time. So they keep doing this, but by and large, if you talk about the labor area, I'm right now, we have a proposal to the United States government, to the Labor Department, about how, because there was a proposal in California to turn them into full employees with benefits and everything, healthcare in the United States, of course, tied to employment. These people don't have healthcare benefit. So it's ridiculous. So it's, and there was a proposal in California that failed. They did not pass it to make them employees. But we are trying now to devise a business model that will be win-win, that allow the companies to still, continue the business, but in a different way, and allow people to have somewhat more dignified existence. So anyway, that's the point on labor and at least those platforms.
Thank you.
And I would just add one thing on top of that too, is that there's an interesting transition point that has not been taken advantage of, is that these individuals who work for any of these delivery services, for Uber, for whatnot, is that this could be an entryway into something more fulfilling, to Yossi's point, is if we can make this an entryway into supply chain careers. Obviously, we know that there is a gap in talent. So how do we bring in people in new and different ways? And these are individuals who don't even know that they're part of the global supply chain. So how do we create an education path and a training path where we can advance their careers just from they're just a driver now in some sense, but how do we bring them into a professional path using the sharing economy, collaborative platforms as an entryway?
And I just wanted to connect also with the retailer's perspective, because definitely, and due to the shortage of drivers and more specifically in last mile deliveries, these companies are bringing flexibility for them to being able to deliver their online orders. So it's facilitating in some way or bringing this flexibility that sometimes they don't have in order to be able to accomplish these online deliveries. We have many examples for restaurants, for Instacart, for grocery too, DoorDash. So many of those companies are bringing also this flexibility that retailers also need.
And that's the point, because you need to clearly they provide value to the platform owners or to the retailers or stuff. But right now the value is provided on the back of people who are working in really deplorable conditions, and that's the problem. The problem is how do you make both sides win? I'm not saying move to one side or another, but try to think about how to make sure that both sides win.
Great. Some really valuable insights there from our panelists. The questions are rolling in now, I'm pleased to say. So our next question's from Andres. And I believe Andres is asking, how well have business continuity plans worked, during this crisis time that we've experienced in the last 18 months? So how successful have business continuity plans been?
Well, if I can start that, I mean, I'm sure there's been a lot of successful examples of good continuity planning, but I think the problem with most conventional business continuity plans is that they're very limited in their focus. They tend to be very much internally based. They look at financial risk and so forth, and they're looking at what happens if the factory burns down, what happens if the IT system collapses. I mean, fine, great, but I think the real challenge to continuity is in the wider supply chain, and I think it's there that in my limited experience, certainly, of looking at organizations and how they manage risk, that's the real issue, that we haven't had that sort of insight, both upstream and downstream, into the sort of potential risks, the pinch points, the bottlenecks, and so forth. Yossi mentioned earlier on the need to do stress tests, and I think the number of companies that I've come across doing stress tests of their supply chain, I could count not on one hand but on one finger probably.
Yes, what I love in this statement is Martin British understatement about his limited experience. We all wish we had the experience that Martin has, but hey, we're dealing with.
Excellent, great. Now we have a question that's come in from Manuel, who's asking that supply chains in Latin America have different problems and different characteristics. So can the same models and strategies be established there? What do you suggest for businesses in Latin America specifically?
Maybe we'll make one point. It's not specifically Latin America, but the most obvious in Latin America is the huge part that the very small enterprises have in the market. That's a characteristic of the market, that the nano stores, the very small manufacturing, very small family-owned businesses, they employ the vast majority of workers in Latin America, whether it's Mexico, Guatemala, Salvador, whatever. So that's create a very interesting issue. And by the way, we have a project working on this right now that my colleague Josue Velasquez is leading, about how to make these people more efficient. And in our research, we found out first that all the consultants that the Mexican government and the other governments hired were mistaken, because they were trying to apply ERP ideas, optimization ideas to people who run the corner bodega and do their order is in their head, even not even in a spreadsheet. So the idea that try to apply big time solutions for this is ridiculous. And there are, of course, big multi-Latina who use international solution, but that's not what characterizes the market. So we are developing, for example, app-based inventory optimization or app-based ordering. Interestingly, we are paid by the big company, by companies like who deliver the Coca-Cola to all of them. And the reason is why. You'll be amazed, but in Mexico City, 10% of this enterprise fail every month. Every month, there's about 10%, revolving door. It drives the FEMSA and all the other big companies who deliver. They don't know who to deliver to. There's a lot of waste in this because people are popping up, people are not there. So they would like to stabilize this market. So we hope that with a cell phone, and everything is just based on cell phone, that we can have more professional, first of all, point of sale data, ordering data, inventory data, and try to make these people more economically viable. But to me, and this is very different than dealing with Procter & Gamble or Intel or Unilever or Tesco or whatever.
Great, thank you, Yoshi. We have another question that's linked to this as well. It's, I guess, all the chaos that we've been seeing in our supply chains of late. When and how do you believe that the supply chain will be restored with the current lack of ships and containers, and in particularly, continuing the export to South America?
I think there are many people who are waiting to hear Martin's view on this.
I don't think anybody has the answer to that one. What I do believe, though, is that it will, I hope, lead to a sort of rather different approach to how we plan our global supply chain arrangements, because I think these shortages, these sort of port congestion, all of these things have been around for quite a while, but they've come together in a rather sort of ominous way of late. And what it's really telling me, I think, is that we have to sort of take an approach to supply chain planning, which I like to sort of think of it in terms of options, basically, and that we're going to be more prepared to invest. Again, it's about being prepared to sort of put money into supply chain resilience, and it's about building these sort of options which enable us to do things. It's not the cheapest way. In fact, I think part of the problem that we've experienced for so long is that what's been driving a lot of supply chain decisions about sourcing, about low-cost country manufacturing, it's all again driven by this desire to minimize costs. Whereas I think the companies that will survive in these turbulent years ahead of us are those that are prepared to invest in flexibility, in resilience, and basically to spend money on options. And it won't be the cheapest, but it'll be the one that lasts the longest.
Let me give you another answer. Not that I disagree with Martin, I wouldn't dare, but it's a different question directly to this question of current shortages. And current shortages are driven in large part by governments. Governments who do the lack of understanding of supply chain operations in government circle, not only the United States, which is clueless, but most governments are clueless about what's going on in supply chain. So let me give you one example. The US government flooded the money, flooded the market with money. Everybody, workers, not workers, whatever, everybody got money. If you made, I don't know, less than $150,000 a year, you got money. Companies got money. They are now talking about infrastructure, $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and on top of it, $3.5 trillion, social infrastructure bill, whatever they call it. this is nuts, because what happens is this will increase the shortages fundamentally, because demand will go to the roof. Demand has been going to the roof because people were at home, they were just getting money, they couldn't spend it, now they can spend it. So in fact, the Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, said so. I didn't even realize what he said. He said, I thought my job is to increase demand. I didn't realize that supply did not catch up. And I'm thinking, the head of the Federal Reserve does not understand supply demand. I mean, this is a little, I mean, it's laughable, but that was his statement. I mean, not understanding the basic concept of equilibrium in markets. So what happened is, as we flood the markets with money, people use it to buy. Of course, we get inflation, we get a lot of other things, but at this point, people are buying. Housing prices go to the roof, asset prices go high. You know, in inflation, I don't know if you, tell you one case, I actually went to buy a new car. So there's the car that I like is a Kia Telluride, the highest rated car. I go to the dealer, drive the car, they have one car on the lot. So they let me drive it. And then I said, okay, you must be not giving discounts. The salesman looked at me, what are you talking about discount? There's the price and we add $5,000 to the price. I said, what, really? He said, yes, it's called, what did he call it? Dealer taking advantage. I said, okay, I'm not gonna buy the car from you because just on principle, this is awful. But he said, he just looked at me and said, this car will be sold this afternoon. Don't worry about it. Just let me go without. So yes, we have shortage, but let me just add finally. I think that towards the middle of next year, the shortage will abate because the prices are going up. At the end of the day, I do believe in, you know, supply and demand, and prices will go up and demand will go down unless the Biden administration will put, you know, $4.5 or $5 trillion on the market, then all bets are off. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen the way they think. So if they're not going to do it, I would expect Q2 next year, end of Q2, for the prices to alleviate the shortages, but prices will remain high.
Thank you.
And prices will not go down.
Thank you, Yossi, and thank you, Martin. I'd like to now invite our two other panelists back into the conversation. So Patrick, if I may start, ask you a question about, because we've just been talking about planning. What are the companies doing to bridge the gap between supply chain design, planning, and execution? What advice would you give?
Well, I think for so long, supply chain has been primarily focused on that execution piece. It's about taking care of that order that's immediately in front of you and doing that as best you can. We're at the point now where there's much more data available, but we now need to take that data and leverage that into knowledge. And then we need to use that knowledge to make decisions. And so ultimately, I think there's a bit of choice architecture that's happening in our businesses, is that we're starting to define what are the decisions we want to make in the future, and how are we making the decision to invest in that future capability. And to Ava's point before, I think some of the companies that are the most advanced today, one, are the most likely to continue to invest, and two, those that are the most advanced today are that way because of the decisions they made in the future, or I'm sorry, in the past, say 3 years ago. And so the alignment of the design is based upon what we want to happen in the future. Obviously, the circumstances over the past 18 months have been extraordinary, and so it's impossible to predict everything. But we're now in that standpoint of saying, how do we invest in the capabilities that will let us make a good decision in the future, instead of having just to pick whatever's best in front of us? How do we make a good decision and then do it over and over again?
Thank you, Patrick. I believe we have a question for Ava from the audience directly. So Ava, Claire's going to translate that question because it's come in Spanish.
So Eva, I believe this question you'll be ideal to answer. This is a question from Matthias Leighton. It says, how do you see the need of implementing a change in omni-channel, not only in preparing the people, getting them ready for the fulfillment, but also in the quality of the equipment to distribute food and medicine?
Mhm. Yes, it's a great question. Definitely, the question point, one important thing here is that the companies need to build their fulfillment services and be ready to prepare those orders, have the right facility to do that in order to meet also with the customer expectation about fast deliveries. And this matter because these depend on where you need to locate your facility in order to be able to do that. Another thing are the operations, and definitely they need to look for efficiencies in this operation in order to again meet with the customer expectation. The third thing that Matthias is pointing is about how to deliver that. And especially if we are talking about vaccines, if we are talking about fresh food, frozen food, of course, we need to have the appropriate distribution channel to deliver this kind of products that add an extra layer of complexity. So there are companies now that definitely are offering these services. The quality matter a lot because then if not, you can of course, have a problem with that delivery. So definitely something that they need to take care about and invest in those appropriate delivery services, especially for vaccines, medical devices, and of course, fresh and frozen foods. Yeah.
That's great, Ava. Thank you very much. And Patrick, I'd like to come back to you again, just linking to a point that you made earlier about, talent and skills in the supply chain. So we have a question that came in earlier, I think from Manuel, that collaboration in our supply chain is not just about technologies or platforms, but it's perhaps we've got to take a mindset shift here, and it's about sharing everything in the supply chain from education. Could be about reskilling, upskilling. I'm guessing that's what the point's being made here. So what advice would you give to our listeners out there in terms of how we're going to look at collaboration going forward?
Well, I would say that the decision about technology isn't about the technology itself. We don't need technology for its own sake. We need technology because of what it can do. And a lot of times technology is an enabler of collaboration. It's an enabler of data sharing, and it's an enabler of some of those skill sets. I think one of the biggest things that we need to move past is that the technology is just a way to continue pushing buttons. This is about how do we think and act differently. And the big question, of course, is we live with our iPhones or whatever device you have. And so how do we start to utilize these into the scope of our normal lives? Because the old way of working and the new way of working are a bit mismatched. And so let's use technology to bridge some of those gaps as an enabler, not just for the sake of bringing it into the equation to try and do the same thing we've done before, but better.
Just as maybe I can just add as an example, Alliance, Texas, which is a hub of hundreds of logistics companies, they banded together to do two things. First of all, they exchange workers between all these companies. When Excel needs more and DHL doesn't have its peak, they will run workers and from place to place, and this is organized by the owners of the park. And they also partner with 5 colleges in the Dallas area, and the colleges offer 2- and 4-year degrees with the commitment of the companies in the park to hire them, at least for initially, to offer them employment when they finish their education. So things like this, but these are an example of 280 companies now working together, orchestrated by the real estate owners, really by the park owners, because all the companies are becoming more efficient, and their interest is attracting more companies to the park. So it works for everybody.
Thank you for that. And I believe we have another question from the audience that's coming in Spanish. So Claire, over to you.
Absolutely. Please, everyone in the panel, feel free
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So anyone in the panel who feel free to answer the question that comes from Rodrigo Lasso says, what do you think about automatizing the processes, the logistic processes, and the decision-making of unforeseeable incidents to automatize and optimize the operations and maximize the fulfillment to the customers based on the resources that are involved in this processes, including inventory, picking and packing capacity, distribution capacity, and suppliers, contracts involved, because he says not everyone is taking action, taking all of that into consideration.
Okay, which one of our panelists would like to attempt to answer that question? Eva.
I can start, and I'm sure Josie can complement that. Okay, so one of the implications of this automation is for sure faster decisions. You are going to be able to make faster decisions. The question is that these optimization tools need to represent in an accurate way your reality and be accurate models. But as soon as you are able to optimize that and to have these tools, definitely you are going to use your data in order to make faster decisions. And this is something that, again, connect with the customer expectations, and you need to have this faster supply chain in order to reply to these customer expectations.
Well, since Eva suggested that I will add, I will try to contradict her just to make things great. And the problem is when you have fundamental structural shift, immediate, quick structural shift, like we had with COVID, none of your forecasting tools work. None of your design tools work. I mean, that's the danger in some sense of relying too much on technology. I mean, I remember there was Asimov, the futurist, wrote in one of his books, he wrote about, I don't know, the year 2080, that scientists were examining people who can do 2 + 2 in their head. They didn't require calculator because people were just totally dependent on machines. And the problem is when the environment changes so drastically, it is only people have the fortitude, the ability to look at the system and the connection between the system. It's hard to imagine, at least with current technology or even current AI, maybe there'll be a new generation of those. Hard to imagine technology that will be able to respond reasonably well, because at least when I interviewed dozens of companies for my last book, and they did things that are, companies got examples. CNS Wholesaler, which is a huge, grocery wholesaler, the largest in the United States, needed several thousand workers because they looked at stores and competitors that were cutting down the business, even competitors. And just with a phone call and personal relationship, they were able to get thousands of workers to still be with a phone call, to still be on the other company, payroll and still work. I cannot envision an algorithm making a decision like this. It so much relationship is involved in this. So,
thank you, Yossi. And Eva, because we're talking about technology, I would like to come back to you, Eva, and ask you what areas of the supply chain have been impacted by the growth of e-commerce?
Wow, that's a great question, Omera. Many areas, definitely. If I need to start with one, definitely inventory management and inventory visibility is one of the areas I want to highlight, because if you want to provide to your customer this seamless journey and this seamless experience, integrating different channels, one of the key things is you need to be able to track your information to know where your items are and how you are going to deliver those items to your customers. So inventory visibility, inventory management is one of the key areas here. The second area I have observed with a huge transformation because of the growth of e-commerce is the warehouse area, the fulfillment operations. Companies are investing in automation, in faster ways to prepare online orders, and definitely we are observing, seeing new e-fulfillment generation centers centers in order to micro-fulfillment centers and many new different formats in order to be able again to fulfill in a more efficient way and in a faster way these online orders. And then returns. Returns is something that is increasing because of the growth of e-commerce, and companies also need to be ready to manage those returns. So probably these three areas.
Well, that's an excellent answer, Eva. Thank you very much for that. I think as we now come towards the end of our debate, I would just like to...
Sorry, we have just a couple more questions and we have a few minutes left. So if that's okay,
Okay.
I think this question would go for Patrick, and anyone else who would like to jump to answer the question would be great. So this is from an anonymous, someone in the audience. How is the technology going to play its role in the future to meet resiliency or bring resiliency in the supply chain?
Well, I mean, I don't think we're at the point where we're going to have a fully lights out end-to-end supply chain. That's a long ways off. But I do think that there are opportunities to automate some of the things, to Eva's point, to Yossi's point. There are things in the supply chain that can be automated. That's technology that can be applied, that we can start to get a little bit smarter about these things. But ultimately, I think we're at a stage where we need to augment human intelligence. That's really where we need to take the level up beyond just task management. And I think that's kind of the short-term opportunity for technology, is to take us out of some of this repetitive, mundane work and really create some more fulfilling work and really give people a chance to see where insights come from and what they can do about them. As far as what the future holds, I mean, I think that the rate of change is only increasing. And so the things that will be available to us as supply chain practitioners 5 years from now, who knows what that looks like. But I think that some of the things that we're going to see is just this fundamental need to not just be more efficient, but to make work more engaging. And how can we use technology to do that? That's certainly my perspective.
Just to add something, right now, I think if we talk about specifically technology for resilience, I think a lot of companies are emphasizing visibility and transparency, being able to look deep in the supply chain and find out early what's going on. Now, the problem is technology is not going to help because, for example, think about a United States company that was sitting pretty in January 2020. There were already cases in Wuhan, and in February, northern Italy and Europe in general started all falling sick. The United States was still running as if this is not going to touch us. So it's not even the visibility, it's understanding the meaning of this and understanding the implication of something that you can start preparing.
I love the line out of your most recent book, the visibility plus transparency equals trust. I think that that's a fundamental need to supply chain to grow with.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think just to add my sort of thoughts on this, that we have the tools already in a way to improve visibility.
Yes.
We can see things happening sooner. It's our ability to act quickly that's the issue. I think it's one of your fellow academics in MIT, I think, Yossi and Eva, David Teese, who came up with this idea of dynamic capabilities. And what he's really saying is the ultimate competitive advantage goes to those organizations that can move the fastest, having once seen what's actually happening and being able to then respond appropriately. And that, I think, should be the message that we take away.
Agreed.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think that is a really excellent note to end on. I would like to thank all my esteemed panelists here today. I think it's been really insightful. I'm sure the audience has really benefited from all your expertise, and also thank you very much for the presentations that you provided earlier. And there's still lots of questions, so apologies that we didn't get through all of those questions, but perhaps we can link up with some of the members in another format and be able to supply them with some more thoughts afterwards. So thank you, Patrick, Yoshi, Ava, and Martin. Thank you, Claire, for your translations as well. So wish everybody else a great afternoon for the rest of the presentation, and goodbye from here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.